Well, in light of the recent Supreme Court decision to protect the constitutional right of gays to marry, I think we needed to say a couple things to our church family and maybe to anyone else that would be interested. So that's what we're doing here this afternoon. Well, I would say in general, it shouldn't change anything because this reality has been with us for quite some time, that there's been an increasing acceptance of homosexuality as normal. It does sort of formalize what it means in terms of the marriage bond or the marriage covenant. So I would argue that the same love that we have for the world, the same concern we have for the culture would be in place. It may create greater opposition for us because of the prevailing notion that what is legal is also moral. And this is where we would disagree, because there's been many decisions throughout the history of the world and governments that are legal but not moral. You can run down a long list of those if someone was interested, but you go way back to Exodus chapter 1, where the midwives were asked to terminate the lives of newborn Israeli babies. And of course, they refused to do that, so right away there was civil disobedience indicated in the Bible, and that's occurred with God's people throughout the history of redemption. And so this is really no different. What is legal may not be moral, and of course our position is that we stand on the Scriptures as the ultimate source of truth. And this is a great test for us, because we're in a place now in our culture where the prevailing trends of progressivism or secularism have sort of dominated the landscape. And I think the good thing about this is that it will have a tendency to purge people who believe the Word of God as the ultimate source of truth from those that are more willing to compromise with the culture around them. And so this purging effect is ultimately healthy for the Church of Jesus Christ. Well, I would hope we would all have gay and lesbian friends, because that would mean that we're interacting with the real world. In fact, we have children of our members that are engaged in this lifestyle. We have folks who have been in our church that have wrestled with this. We have staff members who have family members that wrestle with this. And I think it's the challenge we have is not to bend over backwards to try to accommodate, but to continue to love and to practically demonstrate concern, to engage. I think there's two kinds of churches that will fail to minister in the future in this current culture. One is the church that can just accepts the cultural trends. It has nothing to really say to the culture. And the other one is the one that pulls back in fear and anger and defiance and rage to simply spew out words of condemnation toward people who don't think like we do. So I think we're called to engage, but stand our ground. I think the model that I would use is the model of Jesus, who is both truth and grace. We try to speak the truth, but we do it in love by affirming the fact that every person we meet is made in the image of God. Well, I've said for a lot of years now that we're not in Kansas anymore. And what I mean by that is it's not the familiar place that we had come to expect, especially people in my generation who grew up in more of the Ozzie and Harriet world. And that's definitely changing as we speak. I think it'd be very easy for us now to attribute every problem in our country, whether it's national security or the economy or the weather, to rulings like this, to say our country is being judged. And that could be true and it may not be true. I'm not really sure what God is up to. I think that the world has been going to hell in a handbasket in a sense for a long time, simply because sin has always been sin. And people who want to do life their way have always been able to express that regardless of what period of history that's been in. So we've been in decline ever since the Garden of Eden, and there's been periods of renewal, periods of revival, and so forth. And it's going to be up to God to sort this out. I'm optimistic that the church has a chance to demonstrate a more radical love than maybe ever before, if we'll just take advantage of this and not be afraid and run from the current challenges that we face. I think we have to address some pretty significant issues along these lines. This is going to be the responsibility of our leadership team, our elders, to sit and ask the question, how much are we willing to engage the current environment? With a community center, something we've envisioned now for a number of years, I still think that 98% of what we want to do is going to be possible in an environment like that, where you're actually opening your doors to the people in the neighborhood. There may be some cases where we get challenged on this. If someone wants to come and use it for a wedding venue or a wedding reception in a same-sex situation, where there is a identifiable non-Christian faith or a pagan religious expression, those are the kind of things that we wrestle through internally. And I would think what I would discover is that the younger members in our church would be more willing to embrace people like that, not because they agree with them, but because they would think that this is what it means to actually engage the culture. I think our older members would have a lot harder time, because it totally breaks the paradigm of what they think holiness or church or separation from a dangerous culture would look like. So we have some questions we're going to have to ask and answer internally about just how far we're willing to go to actually be a community center that the community can use without having unnecessary restrictions, and yet protecting the sanctity and the integrity of our entire endeavor. So there's a balancing act here, and we're trying to figure out exactly what that will look like.